we're discussing a topic that has been extremely prevalent in the media, and that is the topic of the fact that Tobago currently does not have a chief administrator. And this morning I'm chatting with a very popular face to my morning show, Mr. Max James. Good morning. So how are you doing?
I'm very fine. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you for coming. So before we start off our conversation, we're going to get into a clip of Dr. Felix yesterday speaking on the matter, and we'll get into it.
So let me explain what has actually happened. As far as I am aware, the former chief administrator, her last day of duty was the 17th of last month. The 17th of last month, that was May. As required, she actually wrote to the Service Commission indicating, as in a month before that, indicating, hey guys, remember I am going off in a month. I must go off in a month because I have come to the age where I am retired, so I legally cannot function beyond this day. So that happened. That letter was sent from the chief administrator on the 17th of April to the PS, to the Prime Minister. And I'm looking at my phone because I want to make sure I get the dates correctly so that we don't misrepresent anything. On the 15th of May, which is in essence 2 days before the former chief administrator left, the chief secretary wrote to the Prime Minister saying, hey, you know, the last time we had a kind of thing with this, Miss John is going to be gone in 2 days. Remember, this is the process that we should be following. Let's have the conversation kind of thing. On that correspondence was sent and silence. On the 22nd of May, at about 5 p.m., after back and forth, the chief secretary and the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago actually met at his residence in Tobago to speak about this and other matters. So the chief secretary, you know, the chief secretary and the Prime Minister are supposed to be meeting continually. They met on the 22nd of May, which is after the chief admin had left. But, you know, they sat, they had very cordial discussions, and there was an agreement at that point. Yes, the Prime Minister agreed, yes, I simply need to write to my permanent secretary, letting her know that she needs to write to the Service Commission, or he needs to write to the Service Commission, I don't know if it's a man or a woman, and have this situation dealt with. Again, on the 29th of May, the chief secretary communicated with the Prime Minister saying, hey, remember we had this conversation a couple days ago. We are still without a chief administrator. What is going on? And at that point, the Prime Minister gave the commitment that he would actually do what is necessary, and to do that on the 31st of May, because the day after that, the 30th, was a holiday. So we are now to the end of May. On Tuesday, the 5th of June, the chief secretary again communicated with the Prime Minister on the matter. And finally, on Friday, one of the things that he was actually working on was actually having a pre-action protocol letter sent to the Public Service Commission indicating, okay, this has gone too far now. We now have a dire situation on our hands. It is now your responsibility to ensure that Tobago's highest accounting officer is appointed. So that is what has happened. The chief secretary, at every point that is normal, has indicated to the Prime Minister on multiple occasions that this is what needs to happen. We got commitment that this is what would happen, but we are here again this morning. Maybe, you know, I am hoping that after this morning's interview at 8 a.m., I come off of this interview and we recognize that, yes, a chief administrator has been appointed and everything is fine. But as of yesterday, that had not happened.
So we saw.
Okay, and that was our public response on the matter from Dr. Faith Israel, who is the Deputy Chief Secretary. Now, one of the questions that a lot of persons are asking, which I know is not one that you can answer, is why is Dr. Faith really being the voice on this situation as opposed to the Chief Secretary, who we have not heard from in regards to this? But as we get into it, do you want to share any of your thoughts on the fact that we're currently operating without a Chief Administrator?
Well, let me deal, good morning to the viewers. Let me deal with the easy part first. And the easy part is the question prior to this one that you asked. Why the Deputy Chief Secretary, why is the Deputy Chief Secretary speaking? Let us remind the public and the Prime Minister that the Tobago House of Assembly Act caters by law for a Deputy Chief Secretary. And the creators of the act understood that on any particular day, the Chief Secretary can perhaps have a fever, he can be sick, and he can be out of the country. And automatically, the Deputy Chief Secretary would function. In Trinidad, it's quite different, where you have to go to the president and a whole long set of rituals that have to take place. So, by law, the Deputy Chief Secretary can speak for the Chief Secretary. I don't know why the Prime Minister is making it to be that our Chief Secretary is absent without leave and he's making muddying the waters and creating more bacchanal and propaganda in the place. The law says, in the event that the Chief Secretary is unavailable, then the Deputy Chief Secretary can function. He can call the Deputy Chief Secretary and say, Deputy Secretary, can you hold on for me, or can you take this news conference? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that approach. The law caters for it. And I think the Prime Minister must stop sowing the seeds of chaos and propaganda in the society. The Chief Secretary has done nothing wrong. He's acted totally within the law, and he is able to exercise that particular option if he chooses to. That answered that question. In respect of the appointment of the Chief Administrator, why the Prime Minister is the person that takes that matter to the Service Commission. He gains that power based on Section 121 of the Constitution, which reads, "A person shall not be appointed to an office in which subsection 3 applies if the Prime Minister signifies to the Public Service Commission his objection to the appointment of that person to that office." Further on, power to make appointments on transfer to the following offices shall vest in the Prime Minister. So we have a lot of history to discuss. Now, the Chief Administrator is at the same level of a permanent secretary. And therefore, based on the provision of the Constitution, the Prime Minister doesn't want. But however, when the Tobago House Assembly Act was created, originally, I want the public to know that there was a big hullabaloo about who should actually make the appointment. And after all that debate, a section was inserted in the Tobago House of Assembly Act where it says as Section 71, subsection 4, prior to consultation with the Public Service Commission on the appointment of the Chief Administrator, the Prime Minister shall consult with the Chief Secretary. Now, we have this whole thing about consultation can mean, well, I just call you and we talk, and that's it. In the Tobago sense, it's quite different because when you go to Act number 8 of 1988, it says there shall be a public service for Tobago. So Tobago has its own public service. It says, and changing the definition of the word public officer and inserting a new definition, one in the service of the government of Trinidad or of the Tobago House of Assembly. It's a little known act, and we need to look at it a little bit more closely. That is where the Assembly derives its power in the Constitution, or Section 4 of the Constitution. So that we have a situation where, and the Prime Minister needs to observe the history and to go with the tradition. In like manner, where the Prime Minister can refuse a particular person with whom he has to work, at the level of a permanent secretary, the chief secretary also has that latitude and power and determination so he can decide rather, I don't want this particular person, because the prime minister can say, I'm sending you someone from Trinidad to be your chief administration. You see what happens there? It means the prime minister can ostensibly control what happens in the assembly. So there was a revolt against the particular section here in section 71, where it was included that you must consult with the chief secretary. The reason why? The chief secretary must be in a position to determine who he or she wants to work with. And that has been the situation for a very long time. It is since Keith Rowley took over as prime minister, we're having these problems. Because he wants to determine who should work with the chief secretary, chief secretary. That option must remain with the chief secretary, so we don't have disturbance in the place.
All right. So my question to you is, did you hear the response from the prime minister yesterday?
Well, yes, I heard it. I have it on my phone. I have his entire 17 minutes discussion on this particular matter.
Okay.
And he's actually saying that the chief secretary is disingenuous.
All right. And so what we're going to do, we're going to take a quick break and we're going to come back with the prime minister's response and we're going to discuss that a bit. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break and see you right after this.
The energy filled the skies. Tobago updates. Good morning.
Today, there is no administrator in Tobago, chief administrator, because that's the most senior public servant in Tobago is the chief administrator. This absence of an administrator in Tobago came about as a result of the administrator who was in office reaching retirement age. There are two loci of government administration in Tobago. One is the THA, that has as its senior public servant, the chief administrator. So regardless of the politics and the seats and the political party, the senior public servant in the assembly is the chief administrator. But there's the Central Administration Service in Tobago called CAST, which is under the Prime Minister's office. That office has as its senior person another public servant in the capacity of permanent secretary. The chief administrator and the permanent secretary are roughly on the same level. And things were going fine until this administrator came to retirement age. I met with the chief secretary. We sat and chatted for an hour and a half on matters Tobago. One of the matters that was raised in that discussion was the requirement to agree on a new chief administrator. I at the time was unaware of the actual date of the retirement, but I knew that that will come to me from the Public Service Commission, because these two positions, permanent secretary CAS, chief administrator, are public service positions. I'm a politician, the chief secretary is a politician. We have to respect the role of the independent Public Service Commission, which treats with public servants. The public administrator will be sought by the Public Service Commission and identified. That commission will make a recommendation to the Prime Minister's office asking for no objection. The Prime Minister under law, before dealing with that, has to consult with the Chief Secretary. And after that consultation, a decision can be made as to who the senior public servant will be to become the Chief Administrator in the THA. That is the law. So I was aware of the vacancy. I'm expecting the Commission to send to me its recommendation as the next qualified public servant in line. And of course, as I expected, the Chief Secretary was with me, and we had a recommendation, we discussed it, and we came to an agreement as to what should happen when the proceedings roll out. The Public Service Commission did its job. Knowing that this administrator was leaving, took steps to see who was the next in line and to recommend it to the Prime Minister's office for the Prime Minister's attention. And the Prime Minister, of course, will have to cover by ensuring that the Chief Secretary is in on the discussions. That recommendation got to the Permanent Secretary in the office of the Prime Minister, but did not get to the Prime Minister. Because at the same time, on the same day that it arrived in the Permanent Secretary's office, in the office of the Prime Minister, from the Public Service Commission, another piece of correspondence arrived, advising the Permanent Secretary that a new development has taken place. So the recommendation made by the Public Service Commission, which would have seen a smooth transition, that one has retired, next person in line, next most senior person, that was disrupted by a second piece of correspondence. So the second piece of correspondence came to the Prime Minister's office before the Prime Minister could even have seen the first piece of work from the Commission, because the first piece had been deemed functus, because the person that was appointed to be appointed by the Commission, with the Prime Minister's agreement, if it was had, that person was suddenly interdicted. By interdicted, I mean, I'm advised that on the last day of the Chief Administrator going out of office, that office advised the Public Service Commission that the person in line to replace the administrator, not a public servant, who happens to have been at cast in the Prime Minister's office, that person is now to be the subject of allegations of wrongdoing and to be suspended. So the Commission now has no choice but to withdraw the letter which was sent to the Prime Minister's office, which was yet to be seen by the Prime Minister, by advising the Prime Minister's office that a withdrawal has taken place of so-and-so person, and that the process now has to start over with the Public Service Commission looking for the next person in line. And of course, the process of commission to Prime Minister to Chief Secretary would have to take place before an administrator could be had.
Excellent. So, guys, that was just the response from the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, made yesterday during his press conference as he addressed the matter of the absence of a chief administrator in Tobago. So, before we went to the break, I asked if you were able to see the response of the Prime Minister, because he made it clear the process that takes place in order to appoint a chief administrator. But he also indicated that while Dr. Faith stated that they still had not gotten a response, that the process was ongoing and recommendations were being made. And a particular recommendation was being made for a particular individual who at the time was the Permanent Secretary at CAST. Now, we are hearing that before he could have even seen that recommendation, he also received another document that said, okay, the person that was recommended was suspended. Moving forward, there are a number of questions being asked in the public space. One of those questions being, why so close to the appointment was this individual suspended? Or why was it so close to the demitting office did the chief administrator at the time, being Ms. Etlin John, decide to write at such a late point during her tenure? When she was about to leave, she wrote to the Service Commission indicating that there was a current investigation happening to this individual. There's a lot of questions surrounding that. But what we want to really get down to the bottom of is, could this situation have been avoided had the communication been better between the THA and the central government?
Right, and so that's a pertinent question. And it goes to the root or the whole question of succession planning. The the timelines given by the Prime Minister, I don't know whether that is accurate. But let me see. If we had been practicing effective succession planning in the entire public service, this thing perhaps may not have arisen. I'll tell you why. The Public Service Commission is expected or supposed to have on record for a whole long year before who are the persons likely to proceed on retirement leave. So in that context, the commission is at fault. The commission is supposed to have signaled to both the chief secretary and the prime minister, not a mere months before, or 2 weeks before, or 3 months before, if they're doing effective succession planning, meaning we need to know that in the pipeline of successors, possible successors, these are the persons, and these are their retirement dates. But the outgoing or the last chief administrator would have done the prudent thing. She had not been receiving any correspondence. The chief secretary, I wager, had not been receiving any correspondence to say, well, a whole year before, 6 months before, even 3 months before, this person is going off on retirement. Could we have, these are your possible replacements. To give the chief secretary and the prime minister time to consult and to finalize their decision. All right? So I'm laying that blame clearly at the feet of the commission. Now, the chief secretary could not have known that the permanent secretary in caste would have been interdicted according to the prime minister. Remember, the Public Service Commission is the appointing body, is the disciplinary body for public officers. They would have received the audit some time ago. They have to go through the audit and to determine whether there's anything against the particular permanent secretary that was at caste. For the prime minister to say that he doesn't know, that is his permanent secretary. The prime minister receives intelligence from all quarters of the nation on a daily basis. A brief comes to him, the special branch police come to him, they send a brief to him. Even a simple trade union meeting, they send special branch officers to hear who is saying what and who doesn't say what. So I can't believe he's accounting in terms of that. That is his permanent secretary, that is the permanent secretary he chose to be his accounting officer at caste. So that when the prime minister says he doesn't know, I have to take it with a grain of salt. Then how we know that he's less than honest? I say it very strongly. He says, well, the process has to start over again because there is a vacancy, repeat, a vacancy in the commission. And he goes on to tell the nation, so we have to now get that vacancy filled. We have to go to the president and a whole long line of things that have to occur, which is not true. According to the Constitution, the commission has 6 members, a chairman, a deputy chairman, and 2 other members, not less than 4, or 4 other members, as the case may be. So you have a total of 6. So what the Constitution is saying, you can operate with at least 4 members. Prime Minister is telling the nation a different story. A vacancy has occurred, and we have to fix it before this whole thing can happen. But that is patently untrue. Because you could operate with 4, you could operate with 5, you could operate with 6. So if he says there is a vacancy, we're talking about. I
believe that the vacancy that was open was for the deputy.
It doesn't matter. So you could have.
Well, you said it must have.
I was telling you what the composition of the commission is.
Right.
A chairman, deputy chairman, and 4 other members.
Chairman, deputy.
But you can. So the quorum is 4. It could be a chairman and 3 others, or a chairman and 5 others, as a chairman and 4 others. So if the vacancy is the deputy chairman, then you can still operate with the others. So to tell the nation that there is a vacancy and that now circumscribes the prime minister from doing this, or the commission from doing this work, can't be true.
Right.
So the prime minister is a flat liar.
All right, and there was a request made by the opposition or the minority leader, Mr. Kelvin Morris, and he would have called for the current administration to make public or either lay in the House the results of that audit in order to allow Tobagonians to have a greater understanding of why this individual that was up for the position as chief administrator was suspended. Do you think that his call was valid, and do you think that it is something that the current administration should go ahead with?
I don't think they should go ahead with it, and I'll tell you the reason why. You remember many years ago, I don't know, and with due respect, I don't know if you were born as yet, right? It's a long time, no, with due respect, right? But we have to go back to the history. There was something called the Scott Drug Report. You remember that? You have heard of it? It is where a number of police officers in this country and other persons in relation to that particular problem were interdicted. They were accused of selling drugs and that kind of thing. And the Prime Minister at that time laid a report in Parliament, and the whole thing fell flat. So rather than have to go back to that situation, the legal advice was that you send the report to the Commission and let the Commission decide who has misbehaved or committed an act of fraud or malfeasance in the country. It is for the Commission to determine who is wrong and who is not wrong, who is guilty perhaps and who is not guilty. So that I think the Chief Secretary acted most prudently by sending the results of the audit to the place where it belongs, the Commission that is responsible for the appointment, disappointment, and so on of public officers. So that I think that the Prime Minister should walk back his comments. Don't accuse the Deputy Chief Secretary and his Chief Secretary of any wrongdoing, and to lay the blame at their feet. He knew if the Prime Minister can come to the nation and says he doesn't know what happens in the public service in Tobago, nobody should believe him. He has operatives in the Tobago House of Assembly. He has operatives in the wider public sector, and anything that moves, he knows. He mightn't know the exact day or date, but he will know within a few hours of significant developments that take place in the Tobago public service and Tobago as a whole. He has that intelligence. He's situated at the level of the country where all that intelligence comes to him. So it's very difficult to believe what the Prime Minister says. The person who has been interdicted is or was his own permanent secretary, and he had a duty to know and so forth. So just to clarify one final point, the Chief Secretary could not have told the Prime Minister about the interdiction of the particular permanent secretary, because it was not his duty to do that. It is the Public Service Commission to do that. Prime Minister said that himself. He had to be informed by the Public Service Commission. So when he accuses the Chief Secretary saying, well, we sat for hours and we discussed this matter, but you didn't tell me, so it's your fault. No. Because the Chief Secretary could not determine who was suitable or unsuitable. It is not his role. It is not his duty. It is the Public Service Commission's duty. So he's spewing propaganda and bacchanal in the place by misleading the people when he himself says in his press conference, the commission had to tell him. So because the Chief Secretary would have been running in front of the commission if the Chief Secretary says, well, you know, this person is under observation or in an audit and certain things are there. It is not his role to do that. Understood. It is the Public Service Commission. You follow what I'm saying?
Yes, understood.
Good.
All right, well, thank you so much, Mr. James, for coming in and giving your perspectives on the fact that we currently here on the island of Tobago do not have a chief administrator. Thank you for bringing those perspectives into the discussion. Guys, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back right after this.
Rise up to a brand new dawn.